I never thought I'd be the person standing in the rain, staring at the front door of the house I spent 30 years paying for, while my own daughter told me to get lost because I wouldn't ruin my retirement for her brother's latest business venture. The lock clicked, the porch light went out, and just like that, the person I had sacrificed everything for turned into a complete stranger. All because I refused to sign a piece of paper that would have essentially signed my life away. Honestly, looking back at the look of pure hatred in Sarah's eyes, I have to ask you all, was I wrong for finally saying no after a lifetime of saying yes? Or would you have set your own future on fire just to keep your ungrateful children warm? I need you to hear the whole story before you judge me, because what I did next changed the course of all our lives forever, and I don't regret a single second of it. It all started about 6 months ago, though if I'm being honest, the seeds were planted decades earlier. I'm a 62-year-old widow, and for most of my life, my world revolved around Sarah and my son Leo. My husband passed away 10 years ago, leaving me with a modest life insurance policy and a home that was finally paid off. I've worked as a nurse for 35 years, pulling double shifts, ruining my back, and saving every penny so my kids could have the things I didn't. Leo was always the dreamer, or as his father used to say, the one who looked for the shortcut to every destination. Sarah was the stable one, or so I thought. She married a man named Mark, they had 2 beautiful kids, and 3 years ago, they suggested I sell my smaller place and move into a large multi-generational home with them. They said it would be better for me to be near the grandkids, and I'd have my own suite. I contributed the entire profit from my home sale, nearly $400,000, to the down payment of this new massive house. My name wasn't on the title, which was my first and biggest mistake, but they were my family. I trusted them more than I trusted myself. During those first 2 years, life felt like a dream. I was baking cookies with my grandkids, helping Sarah with the laundry, and finally feeling like the nanny in residence that every grandmother dreams of being. I poured even more money into the place, buying high-end appliances and landscaping the backyard because I thought this was my forever home. I didn't mind the extra shifts at the hospital back then because I felt like I was building a legacy for my grandchildren. I would come home with aching feet and a sore back, but seeing their little faces made me think it was all worth it. I even helped Leo out with his rent a few times when he was between his failed projects, never realizing that my generosity was being interpreted as an endless well of resources. Everything was fine until Leo came over for dinner last month with a life-changing opportunity. Leo is 34 and has gone through 5 different startups in the last decade, most of which were funded by my small savings or loans he never repaid. This time, he wanted to open a high-end luxury car rental service. He needed $200,000 to get the initial fleet. He had been denied by every bank in the city because his credit score is in the basement, so he came to me. He didn't just want a loan. He wanted me to co-sign a massive private loan using my remaining retirement accounts as collateral. When I sat there at the dinner table and quietly said, "Leo, I can't do that. I'm retiring in 3 years and that money is all I have left," the entire atmosphere in the room shifted. It wasn't just Leo who looked disappointed. Sarah's face hardened instantly. She started talking about how we all need to support each other, and how Leo finally has a real plan. Mark, her husband, chimed in saying that if Leo succeeded, he'd pay off the rest of the mortgage on the house we were all living in. They had it all figured out, and the only thing standing in the way of their collective fortune was my selfishness. They spent hours that night trying to gaslight me, telling me that I was hoarding money that I didn't even need yet. Leo kept showing me brochures of Ferraris and Lamborghinis, promising me that I'd be driving one of them to my retirement party. When I pointed out that his last business, a subscription box for artisanal rocks, had lost $40,000 of my money, he had the audacity to say that it was my negative energy that caused the failure. Sarah didn't even defend me. She just sat there, swirling her wine, looking at me like I was a broken appliance that was no longer serving its purpose. For the next 2 weeks, the house became a war zone. It wasn't loud screaming, it was the cold, calculated silence. I'd walk into the kitchen and they'd stop talking. My grandkids were told they couldn't play in my suite because Grandma is tired and wants to be left alone. The pressure was relentless. Leo would call me crying, saying this was his last chance to be someone. Sarah would corner me while I was doing laundry, telling me that family means sacrifice. She would drop hints about how expensive the property taxes were and how they were struggling to keep the house running, implying that if I didn't help Leo, the whole family would go under. It was a lie, of course. Mark makes a very good living as a corporate consultant, but they wanted more. They wanted the luxury lifestyle that Leo's supposed business would provide. I started feeling like a prisoner in my own home. I'd stay late at the hospital just to avoid the heavy, judgmental atmosphere of the dinner table. I caught Sarah looking at my suite one day, and when she saw me, she didn't look away. She just said, "You know, this room would make a perfect headquarters for the car fleet management." That was the first time I realized they weren't just looking for money. They were looking for a way to push me out while keeping my investment. Finally, it came to a head on Tuesday night. They sat me down with the paperwork already printed out. Sarah looked me dead in the eye and said, "Mom, we've talked about it. If you aren't willing to be a part of this family's future, then you can't expect to be a part of this household. If you don't sign this loan for Leo, you need to find somewhere else to live. We need that suite for an office to help Leo run the business anyway." I was stunned. I reminded her that my money, $400,000 of it, was in the very foundation of the floor she was standing on. She just laughed and said, "That was a gift, Mom. There's no contract saying otherwise. Sign the papers or start packing." I stood my ground. I didn't sign. And true to her word, Sarah had my bags packed and sitting on the porch by Friday. She actually changed the locks while I was at my shift at the hospital. When I got home, exhausted and still in my scrubs, my key wouldn't turn. That's when she opened the door just a crack, told me not to expect to stay there, and shut it in my face. So, that is where I was, homeless, betrayed by my own flesh and blood, and realizing that I had raised two people who valued a bank signature more than their own mother's life. But here is the thing they forgot. I spent 35 years navigating the chaos of an emergency room. I don't panic, I pivot. Before I tell you how I burned their little plan to the ground, and where I am now, I want you to stop and think. If your child gave you an ultimatum like that, your life savings or your home, what would you do? Would you sign just to keep the peace? Or would you walk away? Let me know in the comments right now, because I want to know if I'm the only one who thinks this is absolute insanity. I spent that first night in a hotel, crying until my eyes were swollen shut. But by Saturday morning, the sadness had turned into a cold, hard rage. I started digging through my old files. You see, Sarah thought she was clever. She thought that because there wasn't a formal loan agreement for the $400,000, it was hers. But Sarah isn't the only one who can play dirty. When we bought that house, I didn't just hand over a check. I had my lawyer, a dear friend from high school, handle the transfer. At the time, he had advised me to record the funds as a life estate interest. It's a legal provision that basically meant I gave them the money in exchange for the guaranteed right to live in that house for the rest of my life. Sarah and Mark had signed the closing documents in a hurry, probably not even realizing what that specific clause meant, because they were so blinded by the dollar signs. I remembered the day of the signing vividly. They were so busy talking about which curtains to buy for the living room that they barely glanced at the occupancy rights section of the deed. I had felt a little guilty back then for being so cautious with my own children, but thank God for my lawyer's cynicism. I called my lawyer, David, and we met on Monday morning. He grinned when I told him what happened. "They can't kick you out, Mary," he said. "In fact, by locking you out, they are in breach of a legal life estate. We can sue for the return of the funds or forced sale of the property." But I didn't want to just move back in where I wasn't wanted. I didn't want to live in a house where my own daughter would spit in my coffee if I turned my back. I wanted my life back. I had David send a formal demand letter. It informed them that they had 48 hours to return my initial investment of $400,000, plus interest, or I would be filing a petition suit to force the sale of the home. Since the housing market had boomed, the house was now worth nearly $1.2 million. If the house was sold at auction, they would lose everything they had put into it, and their credit would be destroyed. I gave them two options: pay me back every cent plus the cost of my hotel and legal fees, or prepare to watch the sheriff put a for sale sign in the front yard. David also included a little bonus in the letter: a notice that I would be filing a police report for illegal eviction, which would have made Mark's corporate background check look very interesting during his next performance review. The fallout was immediate. Leo called me, screaming that I was ruining the family name. Sarah sent me dozens of texts, oscillating between begging for forgiveness and calling me a bitter old woman. She claimed they didn't have the money to pay me back. She even tried to use the grandkids as shields, sending me videos of them crying and asking where grandma was. It broke my heart, but I knew those videos were scripted. I could hear Sarah's voice in the background prompting them. I didn't care. I told her through my lawyer that I was no longer speaking to them directly. On Wednesday, Mark tried to come to my hotel to negotiate. He told me they had already spent some of the equity on a down payment for Leo's cars. He had the nerve to ask me to withdraw the demand so they could finalize the car deal and use the profits to pay me back later. I laughed in his face. I told Mark he had 24 hours left, or I was going to the courthouse to file the partition papers. He tried to play the "we're family" card one last time, but I just looked at him and said, "Family doesn't lock their mother out in the rain, Mark. You're just a tenant in a house I partially own, and your lease is up." They couldn't get the money. In a desperate bid to save their own skin and avoid a public auction that would have netted them even less, Mark and Sarah ended up having to sell the house in a massive hurry to a cash buyer. Because they had to sell so fast, they got way less than market value. After paying off the bank and paying me my $400,000, which the court mandated had to be paid first due to the life estate clause, they were left with almost nothing. The massive multi-generational dream home was gone in less than a month. They had to move into a cramped 2-bedroom apartment on the bad side of town. The kids had to change schools, and Mark had to sell his luxury SUV just to cover the moving costs. Leo's car business? It never even started. The private lenders he was talking to found out about the legal drama and the fact that his collateral, my retirement, was no longer on the table, and they pulled out. He's currently working at a fast food joint, still blaming me for his failed empire. He actually had the gall to send me a message last week asking for $50 for gas. I blocked his number. As for me, I took my $400,000 and did something I should have done years ago. I bought a beautiful, small condo overlooking the coast in a different state. I retired early. I spend my mornings drinking coffee and watching the waves, and my afternoons volunteering at a local clinic. I've made new friends who don't want anything from me but my company. I haven't spoken to Sarah or Leo in months. Sometimes I look at photos of my grandkids and my heart aches, but then I remember that Sarah was willing to make those children homeless just to bully me into a loan. She was the one who destroyed their stable life, not me. I simply stopped being the victim of her greed. I realized that you can't save people who are willing to drown you just to stay afloat. I'm finally living for myself, and for the first time in 62 years, the only person I have to take care of is me. It's a quiet life, but it's a life I earned through 3 decades of hard work and one very brave no. I even started a small garden on my balcony, and every time a flower blooms, I'm reminded that life can be beautiful when you stop letting people stomp all over your roots. I've learned that peace is more valuable than any multi-generational house could ever be. I don't check their social media, I don't ask about their lives, and I don't feel a shred of guilt when I see the sun setting over the ocean. My conscience is clear because I didn't start the fire. I just refused to let them use me as the fuel. The moral of this story is that being family isn't a license to be a predator. Just because you gave someone life doesn't mean they have the right to take yours away, piece by piece, until there's nothing left. I learned the hard way that boundaries aren't mean. They're necessary for survival. If you don't stand up for your own future, no one else will. Not even the people who call you mom. It's a hard lesson to learn, especially when it involves your own children. But sometimes the greatest act of love you can show yourself is walking away from people who only love what you can do for them. If you think I did the right thing by taking my money back and leaving them to deal with the consequences of their own greed, then please like this video. It helps me know I wasn't crazy for standing my ground. Subscribe for more stories about people finding their strength in the craziest situations. And please share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments. Was I too harsh, or did they get exactly what they deserved? I'll see you all in the next story.